So one of the more common questions that we get about our mowing is that we only mow turf areas and we don't mow any native areas. And a lot of people ask, well, what's the difference between turf and native? What we consider turf is typically irrigation sodded areas. So your Bermuda, your Zoysia, your St. Augustine, areas that are manicured, look nice, and typically under irrigation. Our native areas are more of your native grasses that are kind of that are there left over from construction. They're starting to fill back in, or they filled in just from the wild, and they're typically gets real tall, has rocks, and go dormant in the summer, dormant in the winter. And the reasons why we do not mow that native is the destruction it does on, one, the mower. It is hard on the mower, and two, the blades. And I'll show you a picture of our blades. And the first one is actually a mower that mowed all day on turf areas. It hasn't mowed any native. It's just been going all day, probably 8 hours of work that day. And you can see it's still pretty clean. It's got a couple of small nicks in it, but overall it's pretty decent for one day of mowing. The other blade that we have is a mower that mowed one house of native. And what you'll see is there's a lot of chunks taken out of the blade, pits, and it just doesn't look good. It's almost a blade that we have to throw away. And what's so bad about that is if we were to mow that and then come to your house and mow your actual turf, that blade's not going to cut. It is actually going to tear the turf, which causes a number of issues. It can increase the disease problems, it looks bad, and it's just not, it's not fair to everybody after we mow that's getting a terrible cut. So what we try to do is keep the blade sharp and not run it through the native and tear anything up. Also, with the rocks in the native, we can throw those rocks, which can be very dangerous, break windows, and that's another reason we do that. So that is why we don't mow native. There are other companies out there that will, but for quality, we just do not. We want to keep our cuts as good as we can. Thank you.